House of M is often said to be one of the greatest Marvel comic events of all time, but how does it hold up nearly 20 years later? Woof woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus aka the Mad Dog, and we're back with another video. Written by Brian Michael Bendis and illustrated by Copiel, which is a name that I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing correctly. The first issue of House of M was published by Marvel Comics in June of 2005, with the 8th and final issue being released in November of the same year. And once again, the Scarlet Witch has gone too far. Having fled to Genosha, the X-Men and the Avengers have decided that the best course of action is to kill Wanda. But before they have any chance to reach her, Magneto speaks to his daughter, and the world is bathed in a white glow so that a new one can take its place. Mutants are now the dominant species, and the planet is under the rule of Magneto and the House of Magnus. With few remembering the previous lives, the remaining heroes must band together to take down this ruthless empire. But what if some people prefer this new world compared to the old one? And what will be the cost of returning things to the way they were? Getting into the art now, and Copiel to me is a top tier artist. He's one of my favourites that's probably ever worked at Marvel. Everything's got this cartoony feel to it, but it's still got a mature tone and it manages to carry the story. But he is underutilised in this event. There are a few great action set pieces where he really gets to show his array of ability, but the majority of this book is mostly just conversation. And sure, it's featuring a wide cast of characters, and from a story perspective, I really like the conversation and the debates that these people were having, but from what I've seen of him on titles like Thor, I know that he can do more than what he shows here, because a lot of the pages just end up being a combination of headshot, then group shot, then headshot, then group shot, whereas I am used to him being more dynamic from start to finish. But the actual art itself, the line work, the pencils, are what I'd come to expect from someone like him. Now don't get me wrong, when the action does happen, he's on point. Everyone in the frame gets the right amount of attention, there's detail everywhere that you look, and it's just clear that he isn't somebody that likes to cut corners. And especially when I factor in the scheduling of this book and it seemed like it was coming out twice a month, this is just really impressive that he managed to put out something of this quality, and it never really drops from what we've got on the page. And who knows, the scheduling might be the reason why there isn't a lot of group action. Maybe they had to save those moments for the end because he had to put more time into working on it. So if that's a sacrifice that they had to make and do a few but do them right instead of doing a lot but doing them bad, then I think they took the right decision. And one thing that I do like about him that's an underrated aspect when an artist gets it right is that all of his action seems to have weight. Whether it's someone falling or punching an enemy, he just seems to understand damage. It's why I like Ryan Otley so much in the Invincible fights, and I'd put this in a similar category. I just felt like there's physics in the equation, which is something that you don't really notice when it's missing, but I don't give it enough praise when it's there. In the same vein, Copiel is spot on when it comes to motion. Maybe he has some kind of science degree, I don't know, but there's just so much pace that it really adds to the tension. Like if somebody's running or they're in a chase, everything will be blurred, but not to the detriment of skimping out on the art. Another great aspect that I liked when they happened, even though they were few and far between, was these montages. He could condense every major moment of Spider-Man's life into one double-page spread, and I'd look at these pages for so long that the screen would turn off. And on top of that, there was a handful of cerebral and surreal moments where characters were going into other people's minds. These were fantastic, and even though the majority came in the later part of the book, it just made me realise that Copiel could just turn up the dial whenever he needed to. There were these real moments of blockbuster level of presentation that reminded me a lot of something like Brian Hitch during the Ultimates. Also, and I didn't realise how important this would be to me, but he respects the characters at the time when this book was coming out. That sentence didn't make sense. But his X-Men look like they were directly copy and pasted straight from Astonishing X-Men, and Iron Man and the rest of the Avengers look exactly the way that they do in the pages of New Avengers. Rather than those events where the little details are missing or a character's design can just completely change for no reason whatsoever. But he changes it up again when we're in the alternate universe, and the ones that I liked most in particular were Hawkeye and Spider-Man, but I like that he changed just enough so that we could still recognise who that character is. And another strength of his is the landscapes. Whether it be New York, Genosha, or just pretty much anywhere. If he has an establishing or wide shot, the dude just manages to kill it every single time. In saying that though, to play devil's advocate, and maybe it was because of the scheduling, but there was a lot of missing backgrounds when a character was in focus, and also I just noticed a lot of excess shadows on a lot of pages. They find a way to make it work tonally with the scene, so this is probably just me being nitpicky, and I just like figuring out how this book managed to release a schedule, and I think that this is one of the ways that they managed to make it happen. And additionally, there's also a lot of use of negative space, which does make some scenes feel quite desolate and hopeless, so it does work quite well, but there was just so many instances of seeing a character surrounded by an empty void that I just noticed noticed it a bit too much, in which case I feel like the effect loses a bit of its appeal. A large part of what I enjoyed though was the colours. It wasn't overly bright, but it wasn't all grey and murky and looking like a Zack Snyder film either. And this is going to make me sound dumb, but in particular when there was something that was really shiny, like my boy Colossus, they just got that right. Because yeah, I like shiny things. And one last thing that I feel like I can't not mention, and I know that we're taught to not do this, but you can't judge this book by the covers. I believe it's the same guy who did the art for the beginning of Jason Aaron's Thor, and they do look great, but they look nothing like what's going on in the book. And the problem is, I love both styles, but it does just make it difficult with the upcoming Omnibus because I'm just not sure which cover I should get. But whichever one you decide with, you can pick them up from the channel's sponsor, Organic Price Books. They've got great packaging, fast shipping, and amazing customer services, and if you use code WOOFWOOF, you'll get $2 off your order. And if you're ordering 3 or more books and you want them to be delivered together, make sure you use code WOOFWOOF, ship it together for 5% off your entire order. Don't worry, you can just copy and paste them from the description down below, and you can use these codes as many times as you like. Jumping into the plot, and I feel like this is the story that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness should have been. There was so much that I loved about this event, and knowing me, I'll probably remember something that I wanted to talk about as soon as this is uploaded. And first things first, this book was great at telling you exactly what you needed to know to enjoy this book. Even though I've read New Avengers and Astonishing X-Men, there were still some of the finer details of titles like Avengers Disassembled that I couldn't really remember before I read this. But it caught me up quickly without needing to hold my hand too much or leaving me too confused. It was great, pretty much from the first page they were just like, Luke, Wanda's fucked up again, Hawkeye's dead, we've got the Astonishing X-Men, the New Avengers, it's go time. The balancing of characters was great too, and in a lot of events it's often the case that one really gets the spotlight. And yeah, big hitters like Logan and Spider-Man do take up a lot of the spotlight, but I just like that it had all these moments with characters like Captain Marvel, Wonder Man, Luke Cage, and also Hawkeye, and it gave them very personal moments to help them become memorable characters within this event without it feeling too shoehorned in or that they would try and take over the story. And yeah, it did feel a little bit weird at first when I realised that Captain America wasn't really going to be leading the charge of this one, but then I remembered there's a dozen or so events that have already done that if I wanted it. So it was nice having a change of dynamic and having Logan leading the team. Speaking of which, I love all of the alternate universe representations, and that's the one area where I feel like they really could have expanded on the core event. We get very little time in this new world before a plan's hatch so that they can get back to the old one. Like yeah, I get that time's kind of the essence here, but there's a character that can make the other characters remember the past, but the change happens before we really got to understand how interesting they might be in this new world. With characters like Emma Frost and Cyclops, who we're used to seeing in a world where they're ostracized and discriminated against, why not give us a little bit more time with them in this normal life and see how that would change them? There's also clearly a lot that's going on in Hell's Kitchen, and I don't know, maybe I missed out on some of the tie-in issues that would have answered this question, because for as much as I like the Marvel Unlimited app, in their reading guides, if you click on an issue, it doesn't take you to the next issue in the event, but the next issue in that series. Because for example, Captain America issue 10 is one of the tie-in issues, but if you finish reading that in the app, it's going to take you to Captain America issue 11, which continues the Winter Soldier story, rather than taking you to House of M, Spider-Man issue 3, or whatever it was that would have been next in the event. So honestly, it's more than likely that I skipped some of the important issues on accident. But the stuff with Luke Cage, the references to Kingpin, I wanted more of this. Having him lead his own team of vigilantes whilst being some of the only sapiens that are left on the planet. Where's that series? That brings me on to an unavoidable aspect of modern events. The tie-ins. And the majority of the story of House of M was in the other books that were connected to the event. And trust me, there were a lot of them. And don't get me wrong, not all of them were good, and I am very brutal when it comes to event tie-in comics. If it's a 5-issue miniseries and the first one doesn't really grab me, then I just stop reading it. If it's that important to the main event, it should be in the main event. I did, however, read all of the stories surrounding Fantastic Four, Iron Man, and also Spider-Man that was written by the man himself, Mark fucking Waid. Because what I liked in particular about these 3 events is that it felt like there was a story that was going on before the first issue started. It felt like they'd been living in this world for so long that I was just getting a snapshot into their life. But yeah, I think out of all of them, Spider-Man was the one that I enjoyed most and the one that I'd recommend not skipping at all. There's a lot of reversals in his history and pretty much every major moment in his life just didn't happen, and because of that, he's just the worst. The twist on the Fantastic Four was a fun read as well. It was nothing groundbreaking, and it was quite cynical, but that's what I loved about the world of House of M to begin with. It's supposed to be this perfect world where everybody's pretty much got what they've wanted, but because of that, they are worse people. So it's the struggles that these people have gone through that have made them into the characters that we love now. And an event that can make me realise more about the characters that I've been reading for years is really doing something special, and it's probably the reason why I enjoyed this so much. Again, especially the stuff with Doctor Doom, I wish could have been integrated into the main event more than it just being a few pages in some kind of diplomatic visit. One thing as well about this event is that it felt like the stakes were really high from the very first page. From the beginning, it was clear what needed to happen, and I just loved the debates between the two characters. You had the emotional side, the logical side, and also what it means for them as heroes if they do take the action of killing Wanda. The pace was also spot on in the first couple of issues, even if it did get a little bit too quick once Logan took over and there wasn't really much of a chance to breathe. This really felt like the main House of M event was the one that was leading the charge. And on top of that, I think it's great as well because Bendis often strikes me as someone who needs a lot of time to warm up. Like if you look at a lot of his first arcs, they do take a lot more time to establish the characters, and I'm talking series like the New Avengers and also Ultimate Spider-Man, which, you know, I still think is just the best. In saying that though, I do feel like the final battle in the last couple of issues were just way too rushed and too chaotic. In one of these issues alone, you've got an all-out battle, some kind of search and rescue mission, intense personal conversations, characters being killed and those same characters being resurrected, and then it caps it off with the most important moment of the entire event. Why not just stretch this into 2 issues so that you can have more breathing room and some of those moments that needed more tension wouldn't feel as rushed? Actually, I know the answer to that. It's probably scheduling. But the thing is, when I was first introduced into this world and I knew that Magneto was going to be at the top of the hierarchy, I was really excited to see just how powerful he might be. Normal Magneto's a guy that I wouldn't really mess with, especially if it's the ultimate version of him. But in terms of him pretty much being the main villain throughout the majority of this, I was a little bit disappointed. The main threat is from the world itself, and actually getting to Magneto was more difficult than the battle with him. And honestly, that was a bit of a letdown. I get it though, because there's always the fable about the king who reaches the top and becomes weaker as a result of it because he's got everything that he ever wanted and he doesn't need to sharpen his skills anymore. You know, kind of like the Godfather. But when I'm looking at an alternate universe world, I should never feel like the regular version of a character is more powerful than the one that we're going up against here. I would have much rather have fought House of M Magneto than Magneto from the regular 616 universe. But if you pay me enough, I'd fight either one of them. Another thing that I'm going to have to expand in the spoiler section, but I'm going to generally talk about the ending. Even if you haven't read this before, you might have heard the famous 3 words that are spoken, and it's not "I love you," although it'd still be nice to hear it once in a while. But it made this event have weight, and I loved that. I've already started reading another Marvel event. We're in the summer of events, so you should probably get used to it. And the impact of House of M is referenced in that later title. Sure, die-hard X-Men fans probably don't like what this did to the team, but then again, die-hard X-Men fans kind of hate anything that happens to the X-Men. But for an event to truly mean something, it has to have ramifications. And besides something like Civil War, I can't think of another Marvel event that's had as much of an impact on the universe as House of M. The last issue really slams the brakes on and slows everything down, but it works to this title's advantage, especially after how quickly everything else just whizzed by, because ending the book with all these somber and personal moments just made this event feel so heavy.
There's that word again, heavy.
Jumping into the spoiler section now, so if you don't want anything ruined, I'd recommend skipping to the final verdict. But the first thing that I want to talk about is the reveal that Quicksilver was the one that talked Wanda into changing the universe, and it wasn't Magneto. I like this because it was there from the very beginning if I'd just paid more attention. But it is also a bit of a rough deal on Magneto, who is honestly one of my favourite comic book villains. Mostly because of the fact that you don't know if he is going to be a villain or an ally. And if he is going to be your main villain figure, then don't be afraid to just put him in there. He shouldn't be somebody that can be set up by Quicksilver. And yeah, I did say that Magneto felt weak in comparison to his regular counterpart, but you at least got a moment of rage in the penultimate issue that showed that the real Magneto that we all know is still in there somewhere. But just don't really understand the point in this reveal and then killing Quicksilver, then just to bring him back to life, for the will to just be erased after that. The alternate Hawkeye had a great moment in this as well. It was a shame that he had to be disintegrated into pieces, but him going up against one of the most powerful beings in the universe with nothing but a bow and arrow is just nice that regardless of how the world changes, he stays the same, and the No More Mutants line pretty much overshadowed the rest of this event. It showed that they probably had the right idea from the beginning and they should have killed her when they had the chance. And I do just think it capped it off rather than just turning everything back to normal and there being no lasting impact. Although if it would have been me personally, I probably would have said no more kids. The way that this affected the entire world and not just the mutants was interesting as well. Doctor Strange was drained and the Avengers Tower was just so bleak in response to this. And it's clear that everybody had their own thoughts and opinions on this rather than it just being a human versus mutant thing. Because you know, that was going to happen a couple years later anyway. One thing that I don't fully understand though is how the news knew about this so quickly. Were mutants calling up TV stations and reporting themselves in, or... And I recently started reading Avengers vs X-Men and that's when Cyclops is in the part of his journey where he's just pretty much fully a dickhead. But going back and reading this and remembering how much of a rough deal the mutants got, I kind of understand where he's coming from. And yep, if the diehard X-Men fans didn't hate me before, they probably will after I've just said that. But it is also a little convenient that out of the 198 mutants that did manage to keep the powers, the majority of them are the X-Men that we already know. But then again, what would be the point in this team if they didn't have any powers? And at least it did give us that moment with Bobby where he realizes that he's lost his powers. And even though there was scenes that were going on across the entire planet, that was the moment that really solidified just how detrimental this decimation was. This is my final verdict. And I've always felt that the true measure of quality when it comes to an event comic is how readable it can be after it's finished. As a collected editions reader, that's probably the most important thing. And looking at Marvel Comics, especially in the last 20 years, there's been countless events that are just completely unreadable, even when I've got the context. But fortunately, House of M isn't one of them. This now is the benchmark that I will compare other Marvel events to. It was intense, had moments of wackiness, pushed the boundaries, and had lasting consequences. Sure, yes, it's not without its limitations. It could have done with a few more issues so that it didn't feel as rushed, and it could have included some of this universe into the main event, rather than just keeping it all tucked away in the tie-ins. And it seems like there are times where the art makes sacrifices so that it could meet its schedule. But when I think about how entertaining this was, and the great time that I had with it, I can't really hold all that against it too much. Because yes, it still holds up today, even if it isn't perfect. So if you did want to read one of the greatest Marvel events, or it's been a few years since you last read this gets a strong recommendation from me. And because of that, I'm going to give it a very high score of 80%. Woof woof! So that's the video, and I hope that you enjoyed it, and until next time, just make sure that you stay safe, and stay mad all you dogs. Woof woof! See you in the next video.